On Raw last Monday, CM Punk made a subtle reference to Jim Cornette. Whilst congratulating Pat McAfee and getting the crowd riled up, he apologized for not listening to Pat's show and said, quote, "I listened to the experience and the drive-through." For those of us in the cult of Cornette, it was easy to instantly recognize the names of Jim Cornette's two podcasts that have dominated the wrestling podcast scene for years. But what does CM Punk listening to Jim Cornette tell us about the past few years of the wrestling business? What does it tell us about Punk's wrestling philosophy? And what does Jim Cornette think of CM Punk? Starting with the latter, I can say I remember during the infamous CM Punk beefs with AEW. Jim Cornette would always take Punk's side. You could argue it's because of Cornette's personal animosity towards the so-called elite. Or you could argue that it's because Jim could see Punk was, quote, working with children. Punk listening to Jim Cornette shows how much he shares Cornette's philosophy on realism and professional wrestling done right. It also informs us what Punk may really think about his former colleagues at All Elite, as Jim Cornette is the most scathing critic of AEW on the planet. This perhaps suggests that CM Punk's disagreements with the Elite go beyond just what happened whilst Punk was at AEW, but suggests that they fundamentally viewed wrestling differently. Punk shouting out Jim's podcasts shows that he has not forgotten that whilst most of the online wrestling community and media were turning their back on Punk, Jim had his back and would defend him on the podcast. Jim Cornette responded to Punk mentioning his podcast on the drive-thru episode 336. Apparently Cornette was trending for this Punk mention whilst he was taking his dog out and didn't even know about it until later on. Cornette would commend Punk's delivery, saying that it was a subtle nod that didn't detract from the story Punk was telling, and that's the correct way to do it. Jim would say how the cult of Cornette reacted very positively to the Punk mention, however Cornette's haters and detractors were enraged. Allegedly, the haters of Cornette on Twitter were saying that they felt Punk was in the wrong for listening to Cornette. Because there's a lot of wrestling fans who can't stand Cornette, being that his blunt and blatant opinions can come off as divisive. Brian last pointed out that the angry reaction from the haters is why other wrestlers wouldn't come forward admitting they listened to Jim's podcasts. Jim and Brian also shared in the praise that last Monday's Raw has received, because let's face it, it was a damn good episode. Thanks again for tuning into Sarcastic Wrestling, Mark. What do you think about this whole situation? Are wrestlers naughty boys for listening to Big Bad Jim, or did you find Punk's reference entertaining? See you next time.